content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Tonight, on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot, I'm bringing you stories of the women you would least expect to have dark natures and hidden agendas. A group of very naughty nanas. True crime tales where charm, manipulation, and a spoonful of sugar masks a very unsettling reality. So grab your glass, get cozy, and maybe think twice about who's making your next cup of coffee. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. Now, she wears her Sunday pearls, hands out candy at Halloween, and never misses a birthday. Her hugs smell like lavender, and her face could just melt the iciest heart. But behind those bifocals and baked goods, she's hiding a secret. These aren't your average grandmas. They just didn't spoil their grandkids. They buried their enemies, and no one saw it coming. Because who would suspect a grandma, right? So let's take a look at these killer grandmas. They are sweet as pie on the outside, but deadly as sin on the inside. She looked like any other sweet little grandma. Rosy cheeks, a kind smile, and a fondness for romance novels. But behind that cheerful giggle was a deadly secret. Over the course of nearly 3 decades, Nannie Doss left a trail of death and destruction across the American South, poisoning husbands, children, sisters, and even her own mother, and all with a smile. So what drove this Southern belle to become one of the most twisted serial killers in American history? Nannie Doss's story is one of the strangest, not because of the body count, but because of the mask she wore while doing it. A mask of sweetness, a mask of love, and behind it, a cold-blooded killer with a twisted sense of humor. Now, Nannie Doss was born Nannie Hazel in Blue Mountain, Alabama in 1905. One of the 5 children, she grew up in a strict, repressive household ruled by a domineering father who forbade his daughters from wearing makeup, going to dances, or even having any fun. At the age of 7, Nannie suffered a head injury in a train accident. She would later blame this for her persistent headaches and mental instability, a red flag we've seen in many serial killers from Richard Ramirez to John Wayne Gacy. By the age of 16, she had dropped out of school and married her first husband, Charlie Braggs. It was a whirlwind romance after all. She loved her romance novels and those heartthrob columns in True Confession magazines. But real life didn't match that fantasy. 4 children, a crumbling marriage, and soon, suspicions of death. 2 of those daughters died under very mysterious circumstances. Now, Charlie Braggs was the only husband who made it out alive. He suspected Nannie of poisoning their daughters and left her, taking the surviving children with him. But Nannie wasn't done. She married Frank Harrelson in 1929, a man who she met in a Lonely Hearts column. The pattern begins here. She would woo men with letters full of flattery and promise, lure them in with pies and pillow talk, then poison them when they disappointed her. Frank was an alcoholic and abusive, and after 16 years, Nannie decided enough was enough. She mixed rat poison into some corn whiskey. He died painfully, but Nannie, she just giggled. Her third husband, Arlie Lanning, lasted only a couple years. He died suddenly, and so did his mother, and even their house, which mysteriously just burned down, with Nannie, of course, collecting the insurance money. She was sure on a roll. In total, Nannie would marry 5 times, with at least 4 of her husbands dying suspiciously, plus 2 children, 2 sisters, her mother, a grandson, and a mother in law. Each death came with a smile. What made Nannie so disturbing wasn't just the murders, it was how she acted. She would smile, she would laugh, she giggled her way through the police interrogations and court appearances, hence the name the Giggling Grandma. She'd poison her victims with arsenic or rat poison, slipped it into their food or drinks. But then she would always stay around to comfort them as they died. One doctor even remarked how attentive she was during her husband's last hours, never leaving his side. He thought that she was a saint. It turns out she was just making sure he didn't recover. What's more unsettling is that she loved the attention. She called the press, her boyfriends, flirted with reporters, and bragged about her favorite murder recipes. One of her husbands, she claimed, died because he just wouldn't shut up. Now, the morbid humor, the shamelessness of Nannie Doss didn't hide her crimes. She practically winked at them. Now, when Nannie was finally caught in 1954, after the sudden death of her 5th husband, Samuel Doss, he had just gotten out of the hospital from a mysterious illness. When he died again just a few days later, doctors were suspicious. This time, they weren't going to let it go. This time, they ordered an autopsy, and the results? Arsenic, enough to kill a horse. Nannie was arrested, and within days, she confessed to killing 11 people. Some believe the real count could be higher. Her motive, as she told the cops, I was just searching for the perfect mate. The moment they would disappoint her, whether they were too controlling, too boring, or just got in her way, they were gone. Now, Nannie Doss wasn't tried for all murders. She did plead guilty to the murder of Samuel Doss and was sentenced to life in prison. She died in 1965 from leukemia at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, but her legend lives on. A killer in curlers, laughing in the face of death, literally. Her story is a chilling reminder that sometimes evil doesn't even have to come in a form of a monster in the dark. Sometimes it wears a smile and then bakes you a pie. Now, Nannie Doss forces us to confront a truth we often don't like to admit, that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers. They're family, they're neighbors. They're the ones we would never suspect. She killed not out of rage, but out of convenience. Her crimes were as casual as her laughter. Perhaps that's what makes her the most terrifying killers of all. So next time someone hands you a slice of pie with a wink, maybe ask who baked it. Now, this is a gentle reminder to keep your friends close, but that sugar bowl closer. 2 sweet old ladies, a cozy home for the elderly, afternoon tea, Bible verses. Sounds like the setup for a feel-good story, right? But what if I told you that this little home in Connecticut became the final resting place for nearly 24 guests, all lovingly cared for by one woman and a suspicious pot of tea? Now let's uncork this true tale behind the dark comedy classic Arsenic and Old Lace and meet the woman who inspired it, Amy Archer-Gilligan, a seemingly kind-hearted caretaker whose lovingly hospitality masked something far more sinister. So let's get into it. Now, if you've seen the classic zany comedy movie Arsenic and Old Lace, you'll remember the sweet old Brewster sisters helping lowly old men move on with a glass of poison elderberry wine. It's theatrical, it's funny, and it's absurd. But the story it's loosely based on, it's not funny at all. It's a true story about Amy Archer-Gilligan, a woman who ran a respectable sounding rest home in Windsor, Connecticut, where the turnover rate was just a little too high and her tea service came back with a kick. Now, Amy Dugan was born in 1873 in Connecticut. She grew up in a conservative household, married a man named James Archer, and together they opened the Archer Home for Elderly People and Chronic Invalids in 1907. Yes, that was the actual name. Catchy, right? The Archer Home was marketed as a safe haven for seniors who needed care, companionship, and some dignity in their later years. It was quiet, it was clean, and Amy Archer was the kind of woman who quoted scripture, smiled sweetly, and always had a warm beverage ready for you. For $1,000, you could secure a lifelong care at her facility. A bargain, really. But then people started moving on. Now, after James Archer passed away in 1910, under what would be later called mysterious circumstances, Amy married Michael Gilligan, a wealthy man who conveniently died not long after their wedding. The cause of death, officially, natural causes, but there were whispers. And then the residents at Archer Home started dying at an unusual rate. In the span of just a few years, more than 60 people passed away in her care. Many of them died shortly after revising their wills or turning over their life savings to guess who? Amy. Some even made final donations after they were gone. Generous ghosts? What raised most eyebrows was the speed. New residents would arrive, appear healthy, and then poof, just gone. Amy blamed it on age, on fate, on the hand of God. But one grieving family member didn't buy it. Now, Franklin Andrews was a healthy man when he moved into the Archer home. He wrote to his family members saying he was doing well and was even helping out with chores. But one day in 1914, he just suddenly became ill and just passed away. His niece, Nellie Pierce, was suspicious. She had seen letters from Franklin just days earlier talking about Amy pressuring him for his money. When she learned other residents also had died under strange circumstances, she took those concerns to the authorities. This triggered an investigation. And wouldn't you know it, when they exhumed a few of Amy's former guests, they found trace elements of something a little extra in their system. Let's call it a non-FDA approved seasoning, something you wouldn't expect in your tea. Now, Amy was arrested in 1916 and charged with 5 deaths, but many believe the real number was closer to 20 or more. Her trial made headlines across New England, newspapers called the Angel of Death, though her church-going demeanor and grandmotherly appearance confused the public. Could this smiling, scripture-quoting widow really be behind it all? At trial, prosecutors presented evidence that she had purchased a large quantities of a common pest repellent, one not exactly used for tea time. Amy claimed it was for cleaning. Now, in 1917, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But in a twist worthy of its own episode, she was later found to have mental health struggles and was transferred to a psychiatric facility where she remained there until her death in 1962. Amy Archer-Gilligan's story didn't fade quietly. It inspired a stage play called Arsenic and Old Lace, which debuted on Broadway in 1941 and was later turned into the beloved 1944 film starring Cary Grant. And of course, the Brewster sisters in the film are gentler, goofier, and a lot more charming than Amy ever was. But the bones of the story are there. Kindly caretakers, a suspicious beverage, and a house full of secrets. It's one of those cases where the truth was almost stranger than fiction, and the fiction just made it easier to swallow. Pun kind of intended. So, was Amy Archer a cold blooded villain, a woman overwhelmed by her responsibilities, or someone slowly unraveling as grief, greed, and delusions took over? That's the mystery. But here's one thing we know: when people show you who they are, even if it's hidden behind lace curtains and a teacup, believe them.
Are you standing at a crossroads in love, life, or purpose? I mean, Mercury is always in retrograde, am I right? But do you crave clarity, a connection to something deeper? Well, welcome to Love and Lotus Tarot, where intuition blooms and guidance flows. Whether you're seeking answers about relationship, career moves, or just a spiritual path, my tarot readings go beyond the surface to help you uncover your truth. Now, here at Love and Lotus Tarot, this just isn't about the cards. It's about connection, empowerment, and rediscovering your magic by illuminating your path. You'll get one-on-one personalized readings with me either by phone or video or in person if the opportunity is there. And if we do a video session, I'll even record it for you and send you a link. That way you can download it and keep it as kind of a tarot journal. Speaking of journals, this just came out. Yes, I just created your very own bitch book. This is a no filter dumping ground for all your grievances, angst, and anger that you carry with you throughout the day. Whether it's valid or not, you still have those feelings, so you need to purge them and get it out, and that's where the bitch book comes in. You can find them on Amazon, along with booking a tarot reading with me at lovelotustarot.com.
She looked like a harmless old woman. At nearly 70 years old, Tamara Samsonova had white hair, a soft voice, and a fondness for tea, astrology, and also dismemberment. She lived in St. Petersburg, Russia, a historic city full of art, history, and cobblestone charm. But Tamara left something far darker in her wake: a string of grisly murders, a missing husband, several heads in garbage bags, and a handwritten diary describing her crimes in chilling detail. Her nickname? The Granny Ripper. Now, Tamara Samsonova isn't a household name like Bundy or Dahmer, but her crimes, they're just as shocking, maybe even more so. Why? Because no one saw this coming. So let's start from the beginning. Tamara Samsonova was born in 1947 in the Russian Soviet Republic. Little is known about her childhood, but by all accounts, she was intelligent, quiet, and independent. She studied foreign languages, worked in hospitality, and was known to speak at least three languages fluently. At one point, she even worked at a prestigious Soviet travel agency. Now, she married in the early 1970s, but something was off. Her husband disappeared in 2005. Tamara claimed that he left her. His body was just never found. But now, if you fast forward to 2015, Tamara is now in her late 60s, living quiet in an apartment complex in St. Petersburg. She's small, soft spoken, and polite, but apparently also a monster. Now, the world met Tamara in July of 2015 after a brutal and shocking discovery. Neighbors spotted a woman on surveillance camera dragging large black trash bags out of the building and down the street. Inside those bags, human remains, arms, legs, and a severed head. Now, police traced the bags back to the apartment Tamara was living at that she shared with 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, a woman who had taken Tamara in as a guest. Now, at first, Tamara claimed innocence, but when the officers searched the apartment, they found blood in the bathroom, in the hallway, on the knives, and in a cooking pot. They also found her diary, handwritten in Russian, English, and in German, and that's when this case exploded because the diary described the murder in detail. Now, Tamara confessed she had poisoned Valentina with sleeping pills, then dismembered her with a saw while she was still semi conscious. Oh my God. Why? They had an argument over dirty dishes. Yeah, dirty dishes. Now, inside Tamara's personal diary were pages upon pages of murder confessions, written like recipes, calm, cold, and terrifying. She detailed at least 11 separate killings over a 20-year span. There were mentions of decapitations, dismemberment, on entry described on how she removed organs, cleaned up crime scenes. Then calmly, she would just make herself dinner. Investigators suspect that she may have murdered her missing husband. You think? Other victims possibly included other boarders, tenants, or neighbors, people who simply just got in her way. She wrote about astrology, citing star alignments and rituals. She claimed to be under some cosmic compulsion as if something larger than her had taken control. But despite these bizarre elements, there was one common thread: control. Tamara liked to dominate those around her. If someone pushed back, she would eliminate them. She didn't scream, she didn't panic. She would just write it all down and then have a cup of tea. Now, once Tamara was arrested, she became this media sensation, but not in the way you would expect. She smiled, she'd wave at the cameras, she blew kisses, she even joked, I'm going to die in prison, so I might as well be famous. During her hearing, she laughed and told the judges, I knew you would come for me. During the graphic nature of the crimes and her mental state, the Russian court declared her unfit to stand trial. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and sent to the hospital indefinitely. There she remains to this day. But justice is still murky because Tamara Samsonova was never formally convicted of murder. Her confessions, her diary, and the trail of bodies speak for themselves, but the legal system closed the book before really fully reading it. Now, Tamara's story has since taken a near mythical quality to it. Some compare her to Jack the Ripper, others to Elizabeth Bathory. But what makes the Granny Ripper different is the facade. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't particularly clever. She didn't charm or seduce anybody. She just quietly killed, methodically, without fanfare. A neighbor, a housemate, a spouse. Even in the psychiatric facility, she had been reported as pleasant and easy to manage, which begs the question, was she faking it all along? Or was she something else entirely? A woman possessed by trauma, by madness, or even something darker? Now, Tamara Samsonova reminds us of the terrifying truth: monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they sip tea, smile sweetly, and live right next door. Her diary is a document of horror and obsession and cold detachment, written in multiple language spanning years of death. And the most disturbing part? We still don't know how many people met their fate at the hands of the Granny Ripper. A charming Victorian home, a kindly older landlady with a gentle voice and perfectly curled hair. She offered tea, warm meals, and a room to those who had nowhere else to go. It was the kind of place that should have felt like safety, but instead, it held a secret buried beneath the rose bushes. This is the case of Dorothea Puente, the woman who turned kindness into currency and her backyard into a final resting place. This one may take the cake. This case echoes a cult favorite film, Psycho. So let's head back to the 1980s Sacramento meet Dorothea Puente. Now, Dorothea Puente appeared to be the definition of a generous spirit. She ran a quiet, nondescript boarding house in downtown Sacramento, California. The home itself was charming, Victorian style, pale blue with white trim and a rose garden out front. Dorothea was known in the neighborhood as a kind hearted lady who took in the forgotten, seniors, people facing hardships, folks who had nowhere else to go. She gave them a room, a board, and a smile. She wore oversized glasses, styled her hair in soft waves, and always seemed to be either cooking something or tending to her flowers. But her past? It was already complicated. Now, before the boarding house, Dorothea had a long list of name changes, multiple marriages, a few brushes with the law involving some financial matters, and a stint where she was not so gently asked to stop helping people with their paperwork. But that was behind her now, right? Well, not quite. In the early 1980s, social workers who regularly visit Dorothea's boarding house began to grow concerned. Tenants would just vanish, but not in a dramatic way, like in the middle of the night. More like they'd be doing just fine one week, and then the next, Dorothy would just say they moved away or that a relative just came picked them up. Except no one could ever find those relatives, and the tenants never resurfaced. One particular man, Alvaro Montoya, drew attention. He had developmental disabilities and a strong bond with his social worker. When he suddenly went missing, Dorothea gave the familiar excuse he left to be with his family, but something just didn't feel right. So the social worker reported it, and that's when things began to unravel. In November of 1988, police visited Dorothea's home for a wellness check. She welcomed them in, served them coffee, answered questions, and remained composed. But one of the officers noticed that the backyard looked kind of odd, like the soil had been turned recently. Now they asked if they could do a little digging, and of course, Dorothea, ever the composed hostess that she was, said, of course. What they found? Well, it sure as hell wasn't gardening. As one officer put it, we just stopped counting after the third discovery. The entire property was searched, and over the course of several days, 7 individuals were located, each buried in carefully dug plots. Neighbors were stunned, friends were horrified, reporters scrambled for answers. And where was Dorothea? Gone? She had quietly slipped away during the initial investigation, taking a taxi to Los Angeles, checking into a motel under a false name. But her face was already on TV, and a man at the bar recognized her and called the police. Dorothea was arrested within days. Now, Dorothea Puente was charged with multiple counts. Her defense argued that she wasn't responsible, that others had helped her, and she was misunderstood, and a woman simply just trying to care for those in need. Are you kidding me? But the evidence spoke louder than words. Checks were still being cashed under the names of the missing. Medications were found that didn't match the needs of those who had lived in the house. And in 1993, she was convicted of 3 charges and sentenced to life without parole. She died in prison in 2011 and still insisting she had done nothing wrong. But the investigators and the families and her boarders never bought it. Now, Dorothea Puente became a symbol of twisted appearances. The smiling grandmother figure who concealed the dark truth behind her apron. Her house, it still stands, renovated, repainted. Some say it carries an uneasy energy. And the most haunting part of the whole case, no one truly knows how many people stayed at that house and never left. She didn't use force. She didn't cause a scene. Her charm was her cover, much like the fictional sisters in Arsenic and Old Lace, except this time it wasn't a farce. It was very, very real. Dorothea Puente is the proof that the most unsettling mysteries don't come from haunted mansions or foggy forests. As we have proven tonight, they bloom in backyard gardens, behind picket fences, and in rooms painted soft shades of pastels. They didn't look the part. They didn't even raise suspicions. But in their quiet little lives, tragedy unfolds, and no one noticed it until it was far too late. Thanks for joining me tonight on another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And if you love this story, leave a review, share it with your mystery-loving friends, and don't forget to check your tea for that extra ingredient. Until next time, thank you so much, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.